We come now to study 4 of Storming the City and chapter 3 of the book of Nahum. At the end of chapter 2, in verse 12, Nahum portrayed the king of Assyria as a lion in his den, a den which was full of prey that he and his family were feasting on. And now in verse 1 of chapter 3, we get another reference to that prey, the endless list of victims who suffered because of Assyria's evil lust for more and more plunder. And the simple message is that Assyria's time of preying on others and plundering them has come to an end, and a time of woe is upon them. As the note on page 28 points out, it's a little unclear whether verses 2 and 3 are a description of what happens in Nineveh, or whether it's a description of what Assyria has done to others. But as we looked at in the last study, one of the themes of Nahum is the irony that what Assyria has done to others is now going to be done to her. So perhaps it's intentionally ambiguous. The metaphor for Assyria changes in verse 4 from being the lion to being the seductive but deceptive and destructive prostitute. Just a quick note, the word charms, which is used twice in verse 4, means witchcraft or sorcery. It doesn't mean that she had charms and so was charming. And the shamefulness of this whoring nation of Assyria is going to be exposed. Their idolatrous filth will be thrown back on them, and nobody will be deceived anymore. All will see her true character, and when they see it, they will have absolutely no sympathy for her. It will be abundantly apparent that the punishment she is getting is what she rightly deserves. Question 1 of the study points us to the issue of who is behind all this response to Assyria, and verse 5 makes it very clear. Behold, I am against you, declares the Lord of hosts. I will make nations look at your nakedness. I will throw filth at you. This is God's doing. Yes, he'll use the Babylonians and the Medes to do it. But don't let there be any doubt. This is God himself coming against Assyria. As chapter 1 verse 2 put it, this is part of God's vengeance and wrath on his adversaries and enemies. And so we're not learning about some weak and benign God watching passively from a distance. This is a God to be feared. As the writer to the Hebrews says in chapter 10 verse 31, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. The Assyrians are, deservedly, learning this lesson the hard way. But if they had not been so blinded by arrogance, they perhaps could have learned a lesson from their own history. Because in around 664 BC, Assyria conquered a city named Thebes, a city remarkably similar to Nineveh, being a central city of the Egyptian Empire that thought it was safe from invaders because of the waterways that surrounded it, and because of her allies. Yet Thebes was destroyed, and with great cruelty. Cruelty, remember, that came at the hands of the Assyrians. That destruction is what God says is going to now happen to Nineveh too. Their fortresses that they trusted in, well, one good shake and they'll fall like ripe figs off a fig tree. Their troops won't protect them, nor their city gates. They can take all the preemptive steps they want, like strengthening their forts and the bricks and mortar, but it won't do any good. They will be devoured and cut off. The destructive and devouring effect the multiplying Assyrian locusts have had on other nations will now fall on them. Questions 7 and 8 in the study pick up on this idea of the Assyrian merchants, who have multiplied more than the stars of the heavens. It's a phrase I suspect is meant to ring a bell in our minds, because it's Abraham's offspring whom God promises to make as numerous as the stars in the heavens. And God's intent and purpose in multiplying them was for them to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. By contrast, these multiplying Assyrians are proving to be a curse on the world, going out and plundering rather than blessing. They have sent out so-called merchants to plunder like locusts. But when the impending trouble comes, these leaders, the merchants, the princes, the scribes, the shepherds, the nobles, will be nowhere to be found. The shepherds and nobles will be useless, asleep at the wheel. And so the people of Assyria will be left defeated and scattered, with no one to gather them. There will be no comeback for them. But as we saw in verse 7, and see again in this last verse of Nahum, nobody is going to feel sorry for Nineveh. To the contrary, they will clap their hands when they see what has happened to them, because everyone has experienced Assyria's unceasing evil. And so the last part of our study explores this idea of scattering and gathering and how it's fulfilled in the New Testament. God scatters in judgment, but he gathers to bless. And although we're subject to God's judgment as his rebellious enemies, unlike the Assyrians, we do have a shepherd to redeem us, to gather us and bless us. And that's the Lord Jesus. He gathers us from many nations around his throne to bless us as his people. Of course, for us, our church, the word actually means gathering or assembly in Greek, our church is a foretaste of that heavenly gathering. And I wonder how much we have that perspective on church as we and ah about whether to go each week. And that's why the study finishes by reading Hebrews 10 verses 24 and 25. We ought to keep meeting together, spurring one another on and encouraging each other, and all the more as we see the day approaching, that day of majestic restoration. So let's briefly sum up some of the key things we can take away from our study of Nahum. We've been reminded about aspects of God's character. God is righteous, so he punishes evil. He scatters the wicked in judgment, and they're left with no one to gather them. Yet God is slow to anger and gracious toward those who take refuge in him. He gathers them to bless them, and he has a plan for the restoration of his people. In line with his promises to Abraham, that plan extends beyond Israel and Judah. It's a plan to gather a people for himself from all the nations of the world, through the good and true shepherd, Jesus, and around his throne. We also saw that God is a jealous God. He's not to be mocked and belittled, because he's all-powerful, and his irresistible sovereignty extends over even the mightiest of nations. And finally, we were also reminded that when God rescues his chosen people, the appropriate response is to celebrate that salvation and always remember the great things God has done for us, and to also live in an obedient way that befits those who have been chosen, gathered, and blessed. I really hope that the time you've spent with your group working through Nahum together has helped you all to appreciate some of these great truths about God and his saving work. And if this video has been helpful to you in that process, please click to give it a thumbs up or leave some feedback for me in the comments section. And don't forget to subscribe to Matthias Media on YouTube so you're more likely to see our videos when we post them here.